Dr. Amara Khalid brushed away the beads of sweat forming on her brow as she squinted into the harsh desert sun. The excavation site was located in a remote part of the Arabian desert, one of the most inhospitable places on Earth. But that's what made the prospect so tantalizing. This unforgiving wasteland had been largely untouched by human civilization for millennia. "Anything yet?" she called out to her team of archaeologists, diligently brushing away at the sand with trowels and soft-bristled brushes. "Nothing definitive, Dr. Khalid," one of her assistants responded, "but these geometric shapes in the rock could indicate an entrance or antechamber." Amara's heart raced a bit faster. After months of painstaking work analyzing satellite imagery and following faint clues from ancient texts, they may have finally located the entrance to what could be one of the most significant archaeological finds of the century, a fully intact necropolis from a heretofore unknown civilization that predated even the Sumerians. As the oppressive desert sun began its descent over the dunes, turning the sky a brilliant orange, the team continued their meticulous excavation work by the light of generators. Amara stepped back to examine the site from a broader perspective. The strange geometric patterns emerging from the rock face were distinctly non-natural, displaying clean angles and symmetry, unlike anything formed from natural wind or erosion. "We've got something here," she murmured to herself, her heart pounding with anticipation. Over the next few hours, the entrance took shape. Two massive stone doors covered in indecipherable hieroglyphs, sealed tight over an inky black threshold. "Everybody take a break," Amara instructed her team. "We'll make our way inside at first light." As the ragged team gratefully gulped down water and retreated to their tents, Amara stayed behind, running her fingers over the strange inscriptions on the doors, her brow furrowed in contemplation. She had a strange, ineffable sense that there was something not quite right about this place, a vague foreboding she couldn't quite put her finger on. Shaking off her superstitious misgivings, she turned in for the night, eager to be one of the first humans to set foot inside this forgotten necropolis after thousands of years of darkness and silence. As the first few crimson rays of dawn crept over the dunes, Amara's team reassembled at the entrance and began the arduous task of forcing open the heavy stone doors. The powerful hydraulic rams they'd brought along for just this purpose strained against the ancient doors with a groan of exertion. Finally, a thin crack appeared, and Amara's pulse quickened. With one last mighty push, the entranceway shuddered open, expelling a blast of stale, dusty air, the first breath of this place in thousands of years. Amara lifted her face mask and shone her flashlight into the inky blackness, revealing a labyrinth of tunnels and chambers stretching out ahead of them into the depths. "Okay, team, let's go make history," she said with a proud smile. "Stay together and be careful where you step. Who knows what ancient dangers could be waiting for us inside?" What should have been a moment of unmitigated triumph and elation for Amara was dampened by a persistent, looming sense of dread as she stepped over the threshold. An irrational part of her psyche felt like she was trespassing where she didn't belong. The air was cool and still, smelling of dampness and age. Amara ran her flashlight beam along the walls, revealing grotesque carvings and effigies unlike anything she'd ever seen before. The symbols and pictograms weren't merely bizarre, they seemed to trigger an instinctive revulsion deep within her, like a primordial part of her psyche recognized these markings as profane and unholy. "You all right, Dr. Khalid?" one of her assistants asked with concern. "You look a bit pale." Amara cleared her throat, nodding automatically. Yes, I'm fine. Just taking everything in." As they pressed deeper into the necropolis, evidence of the civilization that built this place became increasingly pervasive and ominous. The walls were lined with sarcophagi adorned with leering skulls and twisted, inhuman faces. Terracotta jars filled with strange artifacts stood vigil in columned alcoves. Amara felt like she could almost hear deranged, unintelligible whisperings echoing through the corridors, but it was likely just the desert wind playing tricks on her mind. "Look at the hieroglyphs on these sarcophagi," she remarked uneasily. "Have you ever seen anything like this style before?" "No, never," one of her colleagues confirmed, running his hand over the bizarre and unsettling carvings. "They look almost demonic." Amara's breath caught in her throat as her flashlight beam landed on one particularly grotesque and elaborate crypt at the end of a vast sepulchral hall. Seated atop it was the sculpted form of some type of hellish, winged humanoid figure, its mouth frozen in a rictus of agony or rage. "What is that supposed to be?" she asked in hushed tones. Her colleagues merely shook their heads in bewildered silence. Amara swallowed hard and pushed forward toward the crypt, an almost irresistible compulsion gnawing at her. She had to find out what rested within this ghastly sepulchre. Her discovery could rewrite the history books completely. As she ran her fingers along the dust-caked surface, strange pictograms that appeared to depict burning cities and flocks of these same winged humanoid figures became visible. Amara felt the hairs on her arms and neck standing on end, a creeping revulsion paralyzing her. She had the profound sense that she was in the presence of something ancient, predating humanity itself. "Dr. Khalid, I'm not sure we should—" one of her assistants started, but she cut him off with a raised hand. "Just hold on a moment," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Leaning forward, she brushed away centuries of grime and dust accumulating on the crypt's intricate lid to reveal 2 words crudely scrawled in English: "Beware, Watcher." Amara's pulse pounded in her ears as she stumbled backward. "What the hell?" An unnatural, impenetrable darkness seemed to emanate from the very stones surrounding the crypt. The flashlight beams from her team appeared to dull and dim in the shadowy gloom surrounding this place. Like an unfathomable miasma of pure entropy and desolation, blotting out all light and life. Suddenly, a piercing wail like 1,000 tormented souls shrieking in unison cut through the subterranean silence. Amara cried out, clapping her hands over her ears in agony at the terrible sound that seemed to bore directly into her very consciousness. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the wailing stopped, leaving her team visibly shaken and rattled. I think we should leave. Right now," she managed to stammer. Her assistants quickly voiced their agreement, and they swiftly made their way back toward the entrance, trying not to look too closely at the profane hieroglyphs and inexplicable symbols adorning the walls around them. Just as they reached the towering stone doors leading outside, Amara froze in her tracks, hit by a crushing, invisible force of dread and horror, so visceral and potent, it nearly brought her to her knees. An image of the nightmarish winged figure from the sepulchre flashed through her mind, its searing gaze like brimstone daggers piercing into her soul. Summoning every last ounce of strength, she hurried outside and shielded her face from the blinding desert light she had only hours ago welcomed so eagerly. The fresh air filled her lungs and revived her senses as she rejoined her petrified crew. "Are you all—" she started, but couldn't bring herself to finish the question. They all simply nodded in stunned silence, not daring to voice the pervasive sense of primordial evil they had each felt in those sunless vaults below. Like they had brushed against something incomprehensibly sinister slumbering in the shadows. What did we awaken?" one of the assistants finally asked in a quavering voice. Amara had no answer. She simply turned and marched away from that accursed necropolis. As night fell over the desert, Amara lay awake in her tent, tormented by visions of the ghastly ruins they had unearthed. The winged demonic statue atop that profane crypt, seemed burned into her mind's eye, no matter how tightly she squeezed her eyes shut. The full moon cast a pale, sickly illumination over the dunes and filled the air with an unearthly stillness broken only by a softly keening desert wind. Amara's skin prickled with a sense of being watched, observed by some unseen malevolent entity lurking just beyond the frail fabric of her tent. A strangled cry from outside broke the unearthly silence, instantly jolting her awake in a cold sweat. She froze, holding her breath and straining her ears for any other sound over the pounding of her own heartbeat. Then another shriek of abject terror pierced the night, this one followed by a chorus of screams, shouts, and the sounds of a desperate struggle. Amara burst out of her tent to a scene of nightmarish chaos. Her team was under attack by something. Indistinct shapes and forms lashed out with hooked talons, rending flesh from bone amidst a blinding cyclone of mooncast shadows and blood-curdling cries. "Oh God, what is that thing?" one of her assistants screamed, firing a pistol frantically into the melee before a clawed appendage seemed to materialize from the darkness itself and tore out his throat with a sickening spray of gore. Terror seized Amara's body as another of the monstrous forms turned its faceless, shadow-wreathed visage toward her, regarding her with invisible eyes that still seemed to bore straight into her very essence. She stumbled backward, panic clouding her mind as she searched for an escape route. But the hellish spectres were everywhere, their wicked voices echoing through the night like the damned chorus of 1,000,000 tormented souls. Amara opened her mouth to scream, but only a ragged gasp escaped her lips. Just then, one of the fiends descended upon her, an inky black void in the shape of a man engulfed in wings of pure malice and shadow. As it drew within a few feet of her, ethereal tendrils of utter darkness whipping from its form, its face shifted and contorted into a death mask of such infernal, mind-rending grotesquerie that Amara's psyche shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. She stood, frozen in empty-eyed, catatonic horror, as the thing loomed over her, its obscene mouth opening in a rictus grin to reveal rows of fangs dripping with the blackest ichor of the void itself. At last, it spoke in a multi-layered tongue that echoed through every fibre of her being. "After eternities of exile, we begin our reconquest of this wretched realm. Bask in the glory of your master's return, insect." Amara only whimpered, her sanity hanging by a thread as the dark mirages swirled and twisted around her in an obscene dance macabre to the soundtrack of her team's dying screams. Looming behind the horrors, dwarfing them like a mountain of black malice and sin, her eyes beheld the winged statue from the crypt made terribly real, a towering, deific-shaped colossus of blasphemous shadow and malice that seemed to exhale an aura of sheer entropy and desolation. As the whispering darkness closed in, Amara's mind fled to the sanctuary of madness. She would have welcomed death to forestall the encroaching insanity, but she was not so fortunate. She became aware, with a fractured detachment, that her fate would be to eternally witness the desecration of her world at the hands of these newly unleashed horrors. While her soulless husk endured through the eons, bound in chains of lucid delirium, the Watcher and its unholy brethren waged a genocidal war of extermination against the human civilization that had so foolishly unearthed their primordial slumbering place. Great wailing clouds of darkness and despair blanketed the planet, heedlessly butchering all in their path. Towering obsidian spires tore through the blighted, lifeless landscape. Inverted ziggurats and abattoirs dedicated to heaping sacrifices at the talons of the winged Watcher that ruled over this domain of endless night as a supreme god of death. Hapless dregs of humanity were mercilessly harvested and tormented as oblations to the insatiable hunger of the Dark Lord and its countless brood. Worlds died in shrieks of blackened entropy as the Watcher's shadow armada spread like an unstoppable contagion of uncreation across the cosmos itself. In time, even the cold embrace of the void was not enough to satiate its vast, incomprehensible cravings. Matter, energy, dimensions, all was subsumed and extinguished in the fathomless, ever-expanding maw of oblivion that was the Watcher's true visage. As the very fabric of existence degraded all around it, the Watcher at last perceived the finality of its insatiable gluttony. With the last atoms of creation atomized, and the very concept of separateness from the void devoured whole, the fell umbral god would be king only of the ghastly, desolate non-existence it had made eternal. In those last fading vestiges of sentient awareness, the Watcher knew only the singularity of self-loathing and suicidal regret.